This is the story of the development of road, rail, water and air transport in the last 100 years, and of those restoration enthusiasts who have retrieved from the past these great examples of moving history.
The steam age may be over in Britain, but today there are more working engines and more in the process of active restoration than at any time since British Rail's official farewell to steam in 1968. There is now a worldwide rebirth of steam. Steam locomotives are once again finding their way into the national networks. Wales seems to breed an enduring passion for railways. Deep in the heart of the mid-Wales valleys, a little piece of history has been preserved. Little railways like the Talyllyn Railway still operates its complete original fleet of 2 locomotives, Talyllyn and Dolgoch, 4 passenger coaches and guards van in regular revenue-earning service. It's as complete now as it was back in 1866, when this little train served the valleys as it does now, celebrating its 125th anniversary, and has been constantly in operation since then. The Talyllyn was intended to serve the quarry, whose owners built the railway, although a secondary use of the line was to provide transport for the village of Abergynolwyn, where many of the quarry workers lived, and the valley surrounding. The line opened to passenger traffic in 1867 and has carried passengers every year since then, a record that no other narrow-gauge line anywhere in the world can equal. Unlike many preserved lines, the TR has retained its character. The 2 original locomotives still handle the bulk of traffic. A few permanent staff are employed, but volunteers provide the main workforce. Since the society took over, the railway has carried well over 1 million passengers, a feat which would not have been possible without a complete relaying of the whole line. The rebuilding of the 2 original locomotives, the acquisition of others, and the building or rebuilding of more than 20 coaches. As a result of these efforts, the lines have become one of the major attractions of North Wales. At the height of the season, 9 trains a day leave Tywyn for the 53-minute journey up to Mount Cwennog. The scenery is magnificent. The trains pass through trim wayside stations and through the open fields of the lower valley. Now the line climbs through shady woodlands to the breathtaking beauty of Dolgoch Falls and on to the end of its 7-mile run. And so, the Talyllyn Railway, day in, day out, carrying slates for the roofs of the industrial Midlands, and indeed further afield, and Victorian and then Edwardian families on their holiday outings, on the Toy Railway, as it was known. History and great national events passed it by. The railway became a true traveller through time. Demand for slate slumped at the turn of the century, and the railway and the quarry looked under threat. By 1911, the owners were ready to sell off both the ailing quarry and the railway to Sir Henry Hayden-Jones, who was a local figure of note and who became MP for the county of Merioneth. After the Second World War, Rock Falls closed the quarry, and news came of the closure of the Festiniog Railway, which had served 6 independent quarries. But Sir Hayden, as he was by then, vowed to keep the railway running as long as he lived. In 1951, a society was born to take over and operate the line and to preserve its historic stock. So there was born the world's first Railway Preservation Society. Against tremendous odds, and in spite of widespread skepticism, the project succeeded. The railway has been progressively restored so that now more than 65,000 travel on the line each year. Since the Society took over the line, its volunteers have done all the 1,001 jobs involved in keeping it running. They've done it for the joy of seeing their own preserved railway, now 125 years old, still going from strength to strength. The Duke of Gloucester was a unique locomotive. Built by British Railways at Crewe in 1954, 71000 was intended to be the forerunner of a new breed of modern express steam locomotives, embodying the latest developments in steam technology, and designed to serve British Railways until the late 1980s. But the decision to turn to diesel traction meant that the 71000 was destined to remain a one-off and was withdrawn after only 8 years' service in 1962. The Duke was set aside for official preservation after withdrawal, but a change of heart meant that in 1967, the remains of the locomotive ended up in a scrapyard in Barry, South Wales. In 1973, a small group of enthusiasts began the restoration project.
The boiler had to be totally gutted, with the front tube plate taken out, all of the boiler tubes, all of the fire bars, all of the firebox rivets were all renewed, taking off all the rust and all the muck and dirt on the main frames. This is the really laborious, ball-aching work.
After 17 years of hard work, the Duke was rebuilt from scratch, many aspects requiring new drawing, new pattern, forging, machining, and all too often the seeking of new materials and processes to replace those which had disappeared. Revisions were made to correct several mechanical deficiencies, as well as making modifications to the original design. The result was a return to steam on the Great Central Railway at Loughborough, Leicestershire, in 1986. And after further work was completed at Didcot, Oxfordshire, in 1990, the locomotive in England, going east to Norfolk, we encounter the story of the Bressingham Steam Museum. It tells of nurseryman Alan Bloom, who decided in the early 60s to indulge his passion for steam. His first acquisition, a traction engine, is now just one of 50 vehicles on display. The collection includes traction engines of all types, historic fire engines and steam locomotives. These range from narrow-gauge engines, which haul laden passenger trains throughout the season, to some of the largest passenger locomotives to run on Britain's railways.
I got my first traction engine just as a pet, as a kind of a hobby from gardening. But then when people came to see the garden were interested in this engine, that set me off collecting traction engines. Because I realized that there was this nostalgia for steam, and so in the first year or two I collected about 14 traction engines while they were still available, and then the idea came, well, traction engines are not the only steam examples of the steam age having gone past. And so I started on railway engines, but beginning with a small one that only weighed a ton. And after a few years, there were so many here that they were 40 on wheels, and the biggest of them weighed 170 tons. Because I did realize that we had the scope for what didn't exist in this country, which was a live steam museum. And once I got that idea in the late 1960s, I just had to go all out for it. And this is the result.
Alan Bloom's Steam Museum here in Norfolk is recognised as one of the best in the country and the largest in Europe. Visitors can share his pleasure and ride around the gardens in a steam train. The three narrow-gauge lines offer an exhilarating way to view the extensive gardens and nurseries at Bressingham. Drifting over the whole of this living museum is a haze of steam and coal smoke, a reminder of the days when steam was king. Wherever you look, there are working exhibits. This vintage fire engine was a television star in BBC TV's Dad's Army. Even the ever-present music is steam-powered, the accompaniment to a magnificent set of gallopers, a steam roundabout built in East Anglia at the turn of the century. Intercity trains have been around for perhaps a little longer than most of us think. But with this Great Western Railway loco, King Edward I spent the last part of its working life running between London and Birmingham, known as the Intercity Locomotive 6024. The Great Western Railway's King Edward I operated the forerunner of today's intercity services. It was one of the most powerful class of locos built by the GWR, with a tractive effort of 40,300 pounds. However, after 1.5 million miles, the King was eventually retired from service. In 1969, the engine was one of the many steam locos condemned to the Barry scrapyard. In 1973, a group was set up to rescue it, the Quintain-based 60204 Preservation Society. It took 16 years of hard work to restore the king to power. King Edward I was in a very poor state. Its conrods had been cut, resulting in the task to restore it being nicknamed Mission Impossible. Nevertheless, a team of between 30 and 40 formed a working party to lead the restoration. On the 26th of April, 1989, the engine was recommissioned by His Royal Highness the Duke of Gloucester. King Edward I is now fully operational once more. and is back on the British Rail main line, running list, and is pulling the crowds.